Okay, so welcome back, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me. We need to do a little bit of review, I think, because we were doing some complicated stuff with cheese. Now, that sentence taken in isolation might not be well understood, but yeah. So, I mean, cheese, as we said, cheese nowadays is made with usually actually made with chemical rennets, which is usually a lot less problematic than in terms of what to do with it. But in the times of the Mishnah and the Gemara, there were basically two methods of making cheese. One was by adding rennet, which is basically the lining of the cow's stomach. You put that in, and it acts as a catalyst to cause it to separate and congeal. And the second, curdle is the word that I was looking for.
Right.
And the second way is related, but you would allow a calf to nurse from its mother, and then wait a little while for the milk to get down into its stomach, and to react a little bit with its stomach juices, and then shech the calf. Okay, so that then you open it up, and inside its stomach you would find some partially curdled milk, which has now got the chemical from its own stomach inside that milk, and you could take that milk and now put it into a big vat of milk. And that whole vat would now curdle because it's now got the power of that rennet. So that's actually that was probably the ideal method in terms of kosher cheese manufacturers, because then you don't actually get any taste of meat inside the thing. You don't actually have to put a piece of cow stomach into your milk, and it causes the least amount of problems. We did, however, make a distinction that if you jump the gun and shechted that calf a little bit too early. Oh, Leston is asking for the passcode. Let me just quickly remind him that it is 613. Okay. So the as we were saying, if you jump the gun and shechted the cow too early, shechted the calf too early, then the milk inside would still be liquid. All right, and we had a three-way machlokes about what's the status of the milk inside the calf's stomach. If it's okay, and we said there were three opinions. There's the Rif and the Rambam, which the Shulchan Aruch paskins like the Rif and the Rambam, who says that basically, without getting too deeply into the reasoning behind it, but there's no difference between liquid milk inside the calf's stomach and solid milk inside the calf's stomach. They're both considered a completely new entity. Okay, and not even considered milchex, and therefore it doesn't matter whether you find whether the milk that you found inside the calf's stomach was liquid or already starting to curdle. That milk inside there is technically parva. And if it was cooked with meat thereafter, it's mutter. There's no issur at all. Okay, and it would even be mutter to cook lichatchila with meat, according to the Mechaber, and who rules like the Rif and the Rambam. Okay. The Ramah, who is the standard Ashkenazi posek usually, takes a middle ground and distinguishes between if it's liquid and if it's already started to curdle. He says if it's liquid, then it's basically still as it came out of the mother, and then it's still considered milchex. Whereas if it's congealed, then if it's curdled, then it's now a new entity, and that would be considered basically parva.
Okay.
Okay, where Rashi takes the other extreme, saying that he also doesn't distinguish between liquid and solid. He just says, but in both cases it's still considered milchiks, and therefore even congealed milk is prohibited to cook with meat. Okay. And in terms of halacha l'maseh, we're choshesh for all opinions. We're for even for the most stringent. As Ashkenazim, we're choshesh for all opinions, and therefore we do not permit lechatchila for this milk to be cooked with meat. If it did get cooked with meat, then it would be then we ask the question, okay, how big of a loss is it? And then we can, and if necessary, we can say, okay, was it solid? And then maybe we can look to find some sort of heter if it's a big loss. Right, and just to, I mean, this is exact. I just want to read it inside the Shulchan Aruch. If you're looking in Peizain Sif Tes, Chalav anim tzavakeva, the milk that's found inside the stomach, eno chalav is not considered milk at all. Remember, that's the Shulchan Aruch who says that never mind, liquid or solid, it doesn't make a difference. It is not considered milchiks. Mutar levashel bo basar and afilu betzalul sheba says, and there it is in black and white. The Shulchan Aruch says this milk inside here, you could cook meat in it, no problem. Okay. However, there are those who prohibit it, and that's and the Ramah pipes up and says, "Yeah, again." Okay, so since we only see the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah inside our text over here, but as we said before, Rashi holds even by solids it would be considered milchiks. Then we have that concludes Siman Tes. Siman Yud. Sif Yud, sorry. Sif Yud in the Shulchan Aruch now. It says, it returns again about chalav that is found in the keva. And now we have another question of what happens to it. Okay. So the Ramah says, you shouldn't leave it in the keva like this. You should let it cool down. So again, the Ramah is telling you, don't be in such a hurry to shech this calf, because the milk that comes out of the mother is warm, and the warmer it is, the more likely it is actually to be like it is possible that it could be even at a temperature of thank you, which means that if you shech the cow too quickly, then the milk that's inside is effectively being cooked inside the calf's stomach. Okay, so that you really don't want to get into. You must let it cool down a little bit. But if it was done, if he did shech the calf immediately after it drank from the mother, okay, you shouldn't have done it. But no, we're not going to start looking for trouble here. Okay. But now the Shulchan Aruch carries on with his sentence over here. This milk that was found inside the calf's stomach, nimlach, it was now salted. With they cut open the calf and they started salting the meat over here and to get rid of the blood, and then they suddenly realized, whoops, we forgot to get the milk out of the stomach. Now, what does salt do? Salt has the property of creating a sort of a chemical heat. Yeah, and it has the effect of causing technical bishul. It's not actual bishul. It's more like technical bishul. So I don't think salting is bishul daraisa in terms of creating basar b'chalav daraisa, but it does create issues. The same kind of issue happens if you leave the milk inside the calf's stomach for 24 hours, even unsalted and cold. Right? I think we mentioned this before, this idea of kavush kamavushal. If a liquid is left inside a container for 24 hours, then we view it as if it was cooked inside that container. Okay, this only applies to liquids, by the way. And this was a halacha l'maseh that we discovered with an ice cream that we made a parava ice cream. And left it inside and put it inside a bowl in the freezer, which later turned out to be a milchik bowl. And now we were thinking, okay, and we actually the bowl, I think, was even a ben yomo. It might have been. It was clean, but ben yomo, and now we're wondering, like, can we actually eat this this parava ice cream? Can we treat it as parava? It might actually be milchiks. So I went and asked the shaila, and Rav Hanan said no, because it's not a problem, because it froze, and as soon as it froze, it's no longer a liquid, and therefore kavush kamavushal doesn't apply. Okay, so that's just a useful point to remember, that the kavush kamavushal only applies to liquids. Okay, so now getting back into the Shulchan Aruch over here, says that now the milk was salted along with the stomach. Okay, so or if it stayed in it for 24 hours, now this milk is prohibited to use as a catalyst. You cannot use this in a vat to make other cheese. Okay, why? Because now it has absorbed taste from the meat, because it's been cooked. Either it's been cooked, even though it's on a derabanan, it's been cooked derabanan through the salting or through the kavush kamavushal of the 24 hours. Okay, and therefore you are not allowed to use that milk in other milk. Okay, and the Ramah adds the point, the imhe midbo, and even if he did add, even if he did do it after the fact, once he took this milk and put it into a great big vat of milk to make cheese, right? If it was originally liquid, if you took it out as liquid, remember what the Ramah says. The Ramah says that the liquid one is literally considered milchik. It's exactly as it came out of the mother, and therefore it will assur all of the cheese unless there was more than 60 in the milk, that against the kaver, which is almost impossible, because the kaver is the container. So it's practically impossible that you would have 60 in the milk against the container that it's in. However, if it was 60 against it, then the original meat flavor is batel, and therefore everything is mutar. If the however, if the milk that was left inside the stomach was congealed, then he says, then once again he falls back on his opinion that once it's been solidified, it's no longer considered milchiks, and therefore it is but the avad, at least it's permitted. Okay, even if it didn't have 60 against the meat. Okay, so we've seen these opinions a few times. It's all consistent. Okay, so this is the question. I'm not gonna dwell on this one, but he deals with the question here of if it started out liquid and then it's solidified, it's still got the din of liquid. Okay, as far as being milchiks, but there are those who are makil on it. I'm not going to dwell on that one too long. And again, you'll see that a few times. If there's a big loss, then you've got room to be lenient. Okay, or hakeva. Lifamim molchim oso miyabshin oso v'nasa ka'etz umemalim oso chalav. Okay, now the Ramah brings the other way of making cheese, and he says that you actually could do the alternative way. Remember, we said there were two ways. One way is by taking the milk out of the calf's stomach, and the other way is by actually using the stomach of a shechted animal. Okay, but what does he have to do? He says what you have to make sure that it's salted and dried up so that it's like completely dry like wood. Why does it have to be like that? Because you can't have any taste coming out of it. What you want is the chemical in it, not the taste from it. Okay, so you just want that chemical catalyst that's going to cause the cheese to curdle. Okay, so it's got to be made like as dry as wood, so you take that stomach and that whole stomach you can dry out like wood, and you can fill it up with milk, and that now is mutar, because since it has dried up, it's just like wood, and there's no taste of meat going into this milk, and you can take that, and if it ferments, and you can use that as a catalyst in a great big vat of milk as well, and that's all 100% fine. Okay, now this is where things we'll see things get interesting in a minute. Now, right, did we deal with the question last week of nut by nut? No. Okay. All right. So nut by nut is a principle that we also need to know, because it will be relevant in our case over here. And nut by nut is a principle that you'll use in your own kitchens. Okay. Nut by nut is an abbreviation. It's noten tam. It gives taste. Noten tam is for nut, and bar nut is the son of giving taste. So it's giving taste, son of giving taste. It means it's 2 degrees removed from the original. And if you want to take a note on this, here's a worthwhile note to know. Nut bar nut de hetera, which a permitted secondary taste is permitted, and a prohibited secondary taste is prohibited. Okay. Now, to put a real case on this, let's take the case of vegetables. Let's say you have vegetables cooked in a fleischiks pot. Okay, so let's assume that the pot is benyomo. It was used within the same 24 hours to cook meat, but it was cleaned out afterwards, and now you decide you're going to cook your potatoes in it. Okay, so you cook your potatoes in this pot. Now, where does the taste go? When we're looking for kashrus of meat and milk, we're looking for the taste. So the first thing was the meat was cooked inside the pot. Okay, the taste of the meat now goes and is absorbed in the walls of the pot. That's your first taste. Okay, then you take the pot, scrub it clean, put in some new water, put in some potatoes. Okay. Now, the secondary taste is the taste of meat going into the potatoes. Okay, now, is that taste of meat going into the potatoes prohibited or permitted?
Depends on the balance.
It's meat. It's permitted. You're allowed to eat meat. Okay, it's a permitted taste of meat that's gone into the potato. Okay, but now it's a secondary taste of meat by the time it gets into the potato. Okay, so now the question is, what happens if that potato now got accidentally cooked with milk? We say 100% permitted, because it's a nut bar nut. It's twice removed taste of meat inside the potato, and now that it's been cooked in milk, we say, okay, you shouldn't have done it, but and even that is a machlokas between Ashkenazim and Sfardim of how much you can do with that nut by nut, but we'll get to that at a later stage. I just wanted to
do with the 60. There's nothing to do with the 60. The 160.
No 60s over here. No 60s. We've got a real taste of meat inside the potatoes, but it's a secondary taste. And then that potato, then somebody takes that potato and puts it into the microwave with some cheese. Yeah. It's mutar to eat that. Okay, because it was a secondary taste of meat. If it had been cooked literally with the meat, then it's primary taste of meat inside that potato, and that would not be allowed to have with milk. But because it's a secondary taste, and it's a secondary taste, and so again the term is nut bar nut de hetera. It's a permitted taste. Therefore, if it subsequently gets cooked with milk, no biggie. Okay, next case, let's say milk was cooked in the fleishik pot. Instead of potatoes, somebody accidentally heated up some milk inside that pot. So the first nut is the meat that goes into the walls of the pot. Cleaned out the pot, nice and clean, but it's still got a fleishik taste inside it. And now somebody puts milk inside the pot. Now the second nosen time is from the walls into the milk. So the meat enters the milk at this point. Is that permitted or prohibited?
Isn't that chanan already?
Now that's Isser already. See, now as soon as the secondary taste comes in, it's already prohibited.
Yep, but isn't that chanan? In the sense that you've now created a new essence of Isser.
Yeah, it will become chanan. So now the milk becomes a chanan.
Yes.
but at the moment before you cook the milk was mutar. The walls of the pot were mutar,
Yep.
but now the taste of the meat comes out from the walls of the pot into the milk, and that creates that creates your new isur. Okay, and because as it comes out as its secondary taste, it is prohibited. Therefore, the mixture of basar b'chalav is now prohibited. Okay, so that's the difference between nat bar nat hetera and nat bar nat isura.
It's also even before you turn on the flame, before you cook it.
No, only once it becomes hot. Only once it actually becomes hot. If it's cold, if it's cold milk in a cold pot, nothing happened. Pour it out and pour the milk out into the right pot. The milk is permitted. Rinse out the pot, obviously, to get rid of the traces of milk in it, and it's fine. Absolutely no damage done there. Okay. Now, talking about the case of the milk that was in the calf's stomach. So if the milk was left in the calf's stomach for 24 hours, or if it was salted, that's exactly that's a case of it's not a nat bar nat hetera, because the taste of meat that's absorbed by the chalav keva, even if we say that the chalav keva is not really milchix, the first taste of the meat goes into that chalav keva, and then it goes into the vat. So this is now a secondary taste of isur that's going into it, because as soon as the second taste already lands in a position of isur. So that's why you wouldn't be allowed to put this milk into the vat, even according to even according to those who say that the chalav keva is parva. Okay, that's why I wanted to bring the nat bar nat question into here. Right. So now we mentioned earlier about the stomach that was dried up like wood. Okay, and it's and that we said is so the shach actually says that even if it's dry as wood, it shouldn't be used to lechatchila to make cheese. But the Pesach Shuvah and Rabbi Akiva Eiger say that it is permitted to make cheese out of dried or hakeva, as long as there's 60 against it, as long as there's 60 against the meat, right? Because you don't. And now we're going to dive in and do a little analysis as to what's happening over here. But first, I want to throw some more facts into the mix. Just to repeat our point over here, Pesach Shuvah and Rabbi Akiva Eiger both come and say that if you want to use a piece of dried stomach, so let's say you've got a vat of milk, and you've got a piece of dried stomach from a kosher animal, and you stick that into the milk, you can make cheese out of that lechatchila. It's fine as long as the milk outweighs the meat by 60. Okay, do any alarm bells go off in your head here?
Well, the rule of 60 only applied to accidents, not to deliberate.
Perfect answer. Thank you, Lester. That's exactly the alarm bell that should be going in your head. You're not allowed to take a pot of chicken soup and say, let me put a few drops of milk inside there, less than 1 in 60. You can't do that. That's called mevatel isur lechatchila. If you did that, we would asur your soup. So how come now you're allowed to take this meat from the kosher animal, even though it's a kosher animal, right? You're allowed to take this meat and put it into a vat of milk and say, oh, it's less than 1 in 60. It's fine. It's no problem. Okay. So hold that question, but that's exactly the alarm bell. Thank you, Lester, for catching that one. All right. So now we're going to throw some more facts into the mix before we solve this problem. I think this was a Mishnah over here. Eliezer, you can remind me. I think this is a Mishnah in Avodah Zarah. It's quoted here as a Gemara, but the Mishnah is also printed in the Gemara. So Rabbi Shmuel asked Rabbi Yeshua when they were traveling, "Why is the cheese of non-Jews asur?" And he answered, because they make it with the or of a keva of a nevela, and they make it with the stomach, basically, of a nevela animal, an animal that died without shechita, and that's why it's asur. Okay. okay, we'll repeat that in a second. Then comes the Mishnah in Chulin, which says that if hamamid be'or keva kashera. Now, if he uses a kosher stomach as a catalyst for making cheese, if the meat can be tasted in the cheese, then the cheese is asur. Okay, so let's just get the contrast over here. Rabbi Ishmael says to ask Rabbi Yeshua, and Rabbi Yeshua answers Rabbi Ishmael. He says the reason why you can't have non-Jewish cheese is because they use a non-kosher animal stomach as a catalyst. And then the Mishnah in Chulin comes and says, if you use a kosher animal, then then you just have to make sure that you can't taste the meat in the cheese, and it's and then it's permitted. So it seems a bit of a contradiction over here, right? Because the Mishnah in Avodah Zarah didn't give a measurement. It simply says that the cheese of non-Jews is asur. It didn't say, only if they used enough stomach that you could taste the isur in it. Okay. So from there, it seems like just even the smallest amount of non-kosher meat would make the cheese asur. Okay, whereas when we're talking about the kosher, we need to have we only need to have 60 against it, basically the share of tasting. So how do we reconcile the two? First of all, do you have any suggestions before I give you the answer? Have you got any ideas of why there would be a difference between the non-kosher and the kosher? I mean, tachlis, the kosher one, we're choshesh for basar b'chalav, which is also asur, just like nevela is asur. So why should there be a difference? Okay, no takers. All right. So here is the subtle point, and I really like this point from which comes from the Ran and the Rimagash, the Rambam and Rashba. They all explain that the Isser of Basar B'chalav only applies when you can taste both the meat and the milk in the mixture. Okay, that's Basar B'chalav requires there to be a taste of Basar B'chalav. So whenever you're talking about Basar B'chalav, anything less than 1 in 60 is practically as if it's not there. All right, that's Basar B'chalav. But the Mishnah in Chulin is a question. So the Mishnah in Chulin that we said, that's a question of possible Basar B'chalav, and so whether or not the cheese is mutar depends on whether or not you can taste the meat flavor. Okay, so what about the Isur Nevela? So the Mishnah in Avodah Zarah is a case where it's where a nevela was used as a ma'amid. Now the ma'amid is the catalyst. Okay, it's used as a catalyst to make the cheese, and in this case, the catalyst is intrinsically asur, and will render the cheese asur even if it doesn't give taste. And this is a very, very big principle that we have, and we learned this in I think we learned this in Truma. Am I right, Eliezer, in Maseches Trumos? When we talk about machmetzes, when we're talking about the sheer bittul of something that causes something else to ferment or something else to catalyze, that makes a change. When we're talking about a taste, we're dealing with taste. But when something is we're talking about like sourdough, for example. Right. Sourdough is a great example, and it's also very shaykh coming up to Pesach. Do you know how sourdough works? Basically, you got a couple ways of making bread before yeast is discovered. Okay? Yeast is a relatively recent thing in the world. Back in the days of the Mishnah and the Gemara, you could either take your flour and water and mix it together and leave it for however long it takes before it starts fermenting and bubbling, and then you can make yourself a dough and you can bake some bread. And that however takes a while. Now, or else what you can do is make yourself a stock of sourdough. So you basically you do that same thing with water and flour, and you mix them together and you let them ferment and you let them ferment and you create create this thick mixture of fermented flour and water, and you make a paste out of it, and you put it into storage and you keep it there, and it'll ferment for a long time, and it'll go sour. You would not eat that. So when we're talking about Pesach, and there are two things that are prohibited. There's no chametz, which is the food that has risen, okay, and then you have machmetzes, something that causes chametz, and that's your sourdough. It's not intrinsically edible. You would never eat such a thing. But what you can do is you can take a little piece of this machmetzes and basically stick it into your flour and water, stick the machmetzes into it, mix it in, and wham, it's already fermenting. You don't need to sit around waiting hours for your flour to ferment. You've already got nicely fermented dough, and you can stick it into the oven like in a few minutes time. It's as good as yeast. Okay, so it cuts down on your preparation time tremendously, and it's a big time saver. So that's your machmetzes. But your machmetzes is not adding flavor to the dough. It's adding fermentation to the dough, and it changes the whole nature of your dough. And there, now the question that we have in Maseches Chumas, in the Mishnah in Chumas, is what happens if somebody accidentally took some chuma machmetzes, just a little piece of chuma machmetzes, and mixed it into some chulin dough. Now chuma is something that only kohanim are allowed to eat, and chulin anyone's allowed to eat. So now normally we say with chuma, if it's less than 1 in 100, then it's okay. However, when it comes to machmetzes, it doesn't matter how little it is. If that dough, if the sourdough has the power, is big enough to make the batch of chulin dough ferment, then the whole thing is treated as meduma, as chulin, basically as truma, because you can't be mevatel something that had such a radical effect. And the same thing over here comes with our cheese. The rennet is being put into the cheese, into the milk, in order to turn it into cheese. It's not there to give it flavor. It's there in order to make it ferment. And if you put enough of a piece of nevela stomach into the milk in order to make it curdle, it doesn't matter how little it is. If it has the power to make it curdle, then the whole thing is aser, because it was a curdling that was caused by something that was unkosher. Okay, again, that is distinct from the case where you put a piece of kosher meat into the milk in order to make it curdle. There's no isser in the meat. It's perfectly kosher meat, and obviously this also it's dried, so we make it dried so that it's not going to put any flavor lechatchila into it, because otherwise Lester is going to jump up and say, hey, you can't do that. You're putting meat flavor into the milk. It's got to be dry. But the fact that it now makes it curdle, that's not a problem, because it comes from something. It comes from a kosher source, and if it's a kosher source and it's not giving flavor, then the cheese that comes out of that is perfectly okay, as long as it is less than 1 in 60. Because if it's more than 1 in 60, then there's still a chance that there's a bit of that flavor that's coming out over there. Are you with me over here? Okay, so that's an important distinction there. It's a little subtle, but that's a very important principle to remember, that when you're talking about machmetzes and ma'amid, that those things are much more powerful. By the way, the same principle applies to spices. So if you have, it's not common that you'll find non-kosher spices, but let's say you had you took some peppercorns and put them into, and ground them up nicely, put them into a dish, and then you suddenly realized, I forgot to take trumas and masros from those peppercorns. So that's for people who live in Israel. Things that grow in Israel you have to take tithes off them. So people in Chutz La'aretz don't ever need to think about that. But yeah, you're not allowed to eat that produce that hasn't had the tithes taken off it. So now, if you suddenly realize that you ground your spices into it, okay, the peppercorns are so small, it's way less than 1 in 60, but they're flavoring the whole dish. You certainly can taste it. So that again, that is taste, But just to demonstrate the point that the rule of 1 in 60 only applies, to the general case. But when you have strong flavors, then 1 in 60 is not good enough. Okay. There's also a little point over here. Oh, sorry. There are other opinions, by the way, which about whether or not you're allowed to use Orakav as a mamid. The Mordechai holds that you cannot use Orakav as a mamid. It's not allowed. It's simply not allowed. So how does the Mordechai deal with the case of the Mishnah in Kulin? He says that case of the Mishnah in Kulin is talking about where you have a zevazeh gorem, which is that you had a little piece of keva, and you had the rest was made from chalav keva, from the milk that was from the calf's stomach. And the question here that he's saying is it's only mutar if there's no taste, because both ora keva and the chalav keva was used to make it. So it's a zev gorim. There are two possible causes for the fermentation of the cheese, or the curdling of the cheese, and that itself is a discussion about zev gorim. If you have if zev gorem applies because you've got two possible causes, or only when each cause by itself is not enough. So let's say you had a case of zevazeh gorim, not according to the Mordechai now, but let's say you took a piece of kosher rennet and a piece of non-kosher rennet, and they both went into the same vat of milk. Now, is that cheese that comes out of there going to be kosher? Okay, that's called a case of zevazeh gorim, and we're going to say it depends. It depends on whether or not the non-kosher piece by itself would have been enough to make the cheese curdle. If by itself, even without the kosher piece, it was enough to make the whole thing curdle, we say that's still not allowed. But if by itself it would not have been enough, and it only curdled because it had the kosher piece with it, then that is actually still okay. Although there is some subtlety and discussion about zevazeh gorim, and I think lahalacha, we say that it's that if you can attribute it, if it was only possible because both of them got together, you had heter and you had isra that got together to make the thing work, then you can still say it's okay. We just got a few more points here. Halacha l'maaseh. So we said this before, that ma'amid is not batal even in 1,000. We said that already. I just didn't wanted to make the point that even if it's in 1,000, it doesn't matter how much it is. If it's enough to catalyze the cheese curdling, then it doesn't matter what your proportions are. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that's so the last points that I had in my notes were actually what I just said. Okay. So it just I'll throw a couple of quick review questions at you just to make sure you've been listening. What is the din of cooking chalav keva with meat? Remember chalav keva? That's the milk that you found in the calf's stomach after you chefed it. Now somebody says, hey, can I take this milk and cook it with meat? What's the din?
Parv.
And?
Parv?
Parav according to whom?
Oh, to Shaul. To Shaul.
Okay, it's parav according to the Shulchan Aruch, who goes like the Rif and the Rambam. However, Rashi says no, it's completely like milk. It doesn't matter, solid or liquid. It's completely like milk. And the Ramah goes like Tosfos, who takes the middle ground, saying that if it's liquid, it's still milk, but if it's congealed, then it's basically parav. Okay. What else do we want to know? I think I think I've got a few questions over here, but I'll come back to them and I'll start next week's share with these questions just to make sure that you remembered all the points from this share. Any further questions? We're out of time. Okay.
Yes, cool.
Well then, hope
Oh,
you've
thank
enjoyed.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, guys.
Joel, just
Yeah.
before you go, I have a shear at 9:30 tomorrow in the morning, so I just want to let you know for our other shear.
That should not be a problem.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Laila
Thank you.
tov, everyone.
Laila tov,
Nice to
everyone.
see you all.
Laila tov.